welcome to ET India Inc. Boardroom. I'm Aloni Bhatt. We have a special fireside chat on innovative models addressing climate change, ESG investing, and transition to a low-carbon economy. This is quite a mouthful, but quite simply, it's about innovating and investing to save our planet, to save ourselves, and how well are companies globally managing to do this. Now, we have a very special guest to break this down for us. I'm pleased to welcome François Paoli, Global Managing Partner for Environment, Social and Governance at Bain & Company, which is a global management consulting firm that provides advisory services in strategy, marketing, organization, operations, IT, M&A across all industries. François heads Bain's ESG efforts and advises key consumer goods executives throughout Europe, North America, Asia, and Australia. He joins us from Brussels in Belgium. François, welcome.
Good morning, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you.
François, so let's get started. For a long time, the top goals for companies have been wealth maximization or providing shareholder value. With the focus on ESG, have these changed?
Thanks for the question. It has changed, but it has not disappeared. So we are, and I think for most of us, it's exciting, seeing the transition between a world where it was shareholder capitalism to a world that some call the stakeholder capitalism. So nobody is so far trading off shareholder returns, but everybody is asking companies or demanding of companies to add parameters to maximize. So it's the value to shareholders, but it's also the value to a broader community of folks, consumers, employees, and also broader communities. We are in a transition, I said, because the ability for companies to trade off for one for another is not clear yet. And most of the executives I talk to are in this transition phase that they need to provide the ROI they used to while caring for communities. And this is the time we are experimenting right now.
All right. How long do you assume or expect this transition phase to be? And do you see this as being different for different geographies?
No, I think that's you're asking about the timing of this transition. I think it feels that it's, to me, going to be less about the geographies. I can talk about it later, but I feel that the Indian consumer, the Indian investor, and the Indian government is as concerned about ESG as what I see in the United States or Europe. But I think it's by issue that we'll see a difference in timing. There are some issues, and I'll quote two, where we are very close to be extremely clear about what we want. When I say we, it's communities and stakeholders. Carbon gets measured properly. Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3, you may have heard of that. Scope 3 is clients and suppliers. And diversity, equity, and inclusions are two issues that are super high up in the concerns of folks, and that gets measured, i.e. targeted, very well nowadays. If you look at the other end of the spectrum of ESG and you ask me about fairness in governance or biodiversity, we are just at the start of figuring out what the stakes are, how to measure them, and I see a much longer transition. Sorry, just to be technical for a moment, biodiversity is a huge issue because humanity is destroying biodiversity at a speed that we've never seen. But the ability to measure the richness of biodiversity is very limited. Even scientists struggle to do that, Amiloni. And so we are going to see a transition. I think it's going to take years, and it's going to depend on the issue we are talking about.
So ESG are evolving rapidly, and they cause highly interconnected externalities. When it comes to untangling this, web of sustainable growth, we find a lot of interdependence among existing systems. For instance, electric cars are only beneficial if you have electricity which is generated through renewable energy sources. Now, what do you see are some of the challenges that come with this?
It's what I started to talk about with biodiversity. There are three challenges. The first challenge is just a candid understanding right? Some of these fields, like the intricacies of climate change and its effect, I was talking about biodiversity, is not yet well understood. This is science that is moving every day. And I'm glad to see that there are more investments, more research going at this, but it's moving. So that's one complexity. The second complexity is simply how you measure things. You get what you measure is one of the oldest statements in business. We've been measuring profit for 250 years. We have not been measuring ESG for more than a couple of decades, so it will take time. But the third one that you're hinting on is probably the one that will take the most attention, is the way all of this is interconnected. I'll give you a very simple example, is that one of the highest impact thing going on globally is the removal of the Amazonian forest or the tropical forest. Amazonian in Brazil, tropical is in countries like Indonesia. Of course, people don't do that for the workout. They do that because they have no alternative. They do that because they need to make a living. Until you provide a better living to these folks, a transitional agricultural plan, they will continue cutting trees because that's the only way to make a decent living. And so the interconnection between the E of ESG, environment, and the S, the social aspect, is paramount. We are not used as business people, Binoni, to make these connections between stuff. We have been educated to think linearly.
Right.
Linearly means I have an input, I have some value-added process, manufacturing, I have an output, and I have waste. This is how we've been told value chain work. This is how we've been educated at business school. The problem is that nowadays, waste cannot be an afterthought. And growth cannot always come in using more natural resources. So we need to reinvent how we think circularly and how we think connecting these issues together. And we are not yet there in certain sectors. And in some sectors, I see very fast progress, like in fashion, where they are talking about reusing clothes. Yeah. So difficult to understand, difficult to measure. And the biggest challenge will be to think circularly and not linearly.
Companies decide, which one, E, S, or G, needs to be focused on? Do you sometimes feel, though you did say that environment and social is perhaps given a lot of weightage, but governance, perhaps we're not able to move too much on it? But would you say in an emerging economy like India, the S, which is social, may need more weightage because of the social economic deficits that exist?
This is you're spot on, Miloni. I think that I'm going to talk about maybe India as a whole, and then I'll talk about what every company, in my view, needs to do. I think what we are seeing as emerging insights from the Indian consumers is that there is a real focus on the S, and the S mostly around health. Right. Because at the end, in a market that needs to cater for over 1 billion people with amazingly vibrant population, you need to take care of basic health issues. And so I think you're spot on that if you had to do an average of Indian concerns, which of course we know it's a rich country with much larger than Europe, etc. But if you had to say there is one takeaway, it's more S than E. Now, that's an average statement. Every company, in my view, needs to do the work and go from the plethora of ESG issues, depending on who talks about it. We, Bain, have identified 21, 7E, 7S, 7G. I can provide you with the slide. You need to define urgently what are the 5 that matters to you. For some companies, it's water, because they are heavy consumers of water. For some company, it's fair wages, because they have lots of agricultural folks being their suppliers. And we know that with agriculture come tensions on standards of living. Every company needs to do their own work, get that down to a small 5, and decide on which one they will, I wouldn't say play defense, but they will remove negative externalities, remove negative impact they have, but never strive to be positive. When your product is polluting, you try to remove the pollutants, but you don't add value to humanity. For every company, however, there are a handful of these 5, 1 or 2, where you can show positive impact. I think there are lots of companies who can show candidly that they provide better living for their own employees, their own supply chain, the people who grow their materials. The future is into also showing this positive impact on communities.
Right. When it comes to ESG, companies, maybe setting out their own goals, and they will say, "Hey, listen, we're on track." Do you think that in most cases, the consumers, the employees, the investors, they are aligned to whatever goals or purpose the company sets out?
Well, there is a straight answer to this, and it's no. No, consumers, investors, and employees are not always aligned with what the company's purpose is. But it will be a shortcut and probably borderline a mistake to consider this that it's the company's fault. So I'm going to just speak briefly about consumers, employees, and investors to give you a sense of the dissonance we are seeing. First of all, consumers, they are not, especially in India, very educated on what sustainability means. Even in the West, by the way, people don't know yet what the most sustainable offering is. So consumer, because they don't know what they want, because they are not also offered the alternative sustainable products, are not clear about what they want. Cause of dissonance number one. Employees, all the young folks, Miloni, want to work for a more sustainable company today. The data for India is 80%. 80% of 21-year-old to 30-year-olds say they want to work for a ESG-driven company or sustainable employer. The problem is the middle management. The middle management, why? Because they have both the ESG goals coming from the board and the P&L pressure of delivering the returns. And they are asked to reconcile this in their own terms. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So they feel what we call taxed and told. So the middle management sometimes feel squeezed about that. That's cause for dissonance number two. And then the investors have not yet made up their mind on where they are happy to trade off returns for ESG performance. So three causes of dissonance: consumers, employees, and investors, which make most purpose of most companies challenged today more than ever in the past.
Francois, you spoke about the dissonance when it comes to consumers, and especially you hinted at consumers in India who may not be aware of, what are sustainable goods, packaging. But in India, there is also another problem. For instance, if we look at the consumer trend, consumer sentiment, when it comes to sustainable goods and packaging, they are not widely available and they are expensive, So how do we reconcile this?
No, I think this tension, this paradox is very true in India. So it's not reconciled yet, and you're absolutely right, Miloni. It is a tension. I'd say the following: what we perceive from Indian consumers now is that they do care today. So it's not something that will eventually happen in the future. The Indian consumer, health first, environment and social a little bit behind, is concerned about ESG issues. But you're right, they don't have the choices yet. They are not educated, they don't find the product. I call this a massive opportunity. So I call this a massive opportunity for the Indian retailers, the Indian consumer goods company, the Indian company, agriculture company, tech companies, to provide them with better choice at more affordable prices. You're probably aware of this, but in consumer products, you have what you call the say-do gap. Consumers say they want more of this product. Consumers say they are prepared to pay. When you look at what they actually do, their ability or propensity to pay is much lower. And it's very human. If you ask me on a Monday how many times I will work out, Miloni, I will probably tell you 5 times. If you ask me on a Sunday how many times I worked out, it's probably down to 2, 1, or sometimes 0. So there is a say-do gap, not just in ESG, everywhere in humanity.
But François, a consumer will always go towards value. Wherever you are getting the best value, that is where the consumer is going to go. I'm just trying to understand that, for companies to maybe drive to that value, it is a journey. Investors maybe want the company to make the journey faster, but the consumer is also moving at her or his own pace. So again, there is a dissonance.
The dissonance is, I think, the dissonance that will take the longest to take care of is the consumer dissonance, because indeed, consumers are ultimately trading off affordability, availability, and value. Now, the best companies at this are helping consumers redefine what value is. And let me just explain for a minute. It's really Maslow, the Maslow pyramid has defined a series of values for us humans. The best companies are just moving from the basic of what the product does, clean, quality, safe, affordable, to something of a higher element of value, something that makes me as a consumer move from what is the product doing technically to what does it do to me and my community. Yeah. And we have tangible evidence that the winning companies in ESG are helping consumers redefining value and bring value that is higher up in the pyramid, i.e., helping me feel better in my community.
So yes, there is growing realization world over and I think that is with everyone, that we need to be more climate friendly. We need to be more conscious when it comes to doing business. Companies are under pressure to adapt. But what are the pushes and the pulls that you see from your vantage? Are CEOs able to adapt?
This is the challenge number one of CEOs today, is that we've seen everywhere in the world, and I know India was very hardly hit by the pandemics. The problem is that CEOs today need to adapt at a speed that they have never seen before. And a lot has been written, Miloni, around the ability to predict the future. I think by now you and I know that this ability was never very strong, but has disappeared. We have not seen any of the crises that we are experimenting now coming. The second one is people talk about resiliency. The problem of resiliency is that it ends up being buffer capacity everywhere, and it's not providing to be very economical. The real deal is to be adaptable. Most CEOs today will say they are not agile enough, they are not fast enough, and we have a panel of about 2,500 CEOs. The number one takeaway from the pandemic is the issue of I'm not adapting myself fast enough. This gives me, by the way, a lot of hope, because I don't know India nearly enough, but I've been a great admirer of the Indian entrepreneurship wave the last, I'd say, decade. If there is one country that can adapt faster because of its entrepreneurial skills and agility, it's India. I think this will be an opportunity for Indian companies. I'm convinced of that.
All right, that's a huge takeaway for a lot of companies in India. How is ESG strategy for companies paving the way for innovation? Yes, we've seen it in India. So I'd like to give you an example. For instance, a lot of companies, that were perhaps making some kind of material, fabric, they quickly pivoted, and they ended up, making those sterile suits, masks, and stuff like that. So yes, we have, an example of innovation here in India. But can you give us, more of an idea on how the strategy is making way for innovation?
No, but as I was saying, I think there is an element for every company of understanding what the negative externalities are and making sure the negative impact on communities is managed and decreases over time. But by far, what I see in ESG is very close to being a new industrial revolution, i.e. a need to completely reinvent businesses. And let me be concrete on two elements. One, I talked already about, which is the need to create circular models, circular businesses. I think there is an infinite amount of opportunities for businesses in the product area, but in the service area, to tap into this waste that we need to take care of to create new businesses. I see this in fashion. I see this in, you and I only use our car about 1 or 2% of its available time. Most of the time, a car sits idle on the parking space. People like Uber and others are using this spare capacity to make circular businesses. I see infinite amount of innovation coming from this circularity. The other one is technology. We know and it was again very vivid in the report from the UN on climate change last week, we will need to come up with new technologies to manage the ESG challenge we have. I see an infinite amount of opportunities for companies to innovate into these new technologies. And of course, when you think technology, you immediately think batteries, electric car, or new type of fuel. There is also a massive amount of innovation going on in food, in the food system, reinventing proteins. As you know, you can't continue with milk and beef the way we have done. Insect proteins, for example, just that is a massive field for innovation. I'm very hopeful that around circularity and around new technologies, many companies will be able to accelerate growth.
Francois, do you see a time when ESG is so integrated into the DNA of a company's business strategy that brands will not have to really like point at it as a special commitment or a goal?
To me, to be honest, that's the only way I see. Because at the moment, I see that unfortunately for 80% of companies, ESG is still something on the side. And I mean no disrespect, because it's new and I made a point, it was difficult to understand, measure. So I understand why, but we will need to integrate it in the core of the company, because we need to reconcile ESG consideration and growth considerations. Until it's done, we will always have dissonance in companies. The future is when brands will talk about the way they deliver value, and this value will integrate value as value for money, value as quality, and ESG consideration. I see this as the only way.
Right. So really ESG is a journey, isn't it? And it's non-negotiable for companies, because at the end of the day, our survival really depends upon it.
It's a non-negotiable. It's our survival. I don't know when shareholders will adjust. I know that employees and young generation have adjusted already. I see this at Bain & Company. We have 15,000 employees, which makes us a decent sized company. Everybody we recruit, a 21, 22, 23-year-old, want to do more ESG and want to have impact. I think the ship has sailed. We need to do this now, because is it consumers, is it employee, or is it shareholders? I don't know who's going to call it first, but if we bluff, our bluff will be called very, very soon.
Right. And, you know, hopefully with everyone's efforts, we'll have a better chance of building a more inclusive, equitable, and a more sustainable world. Francois, thank you so very much for your thoughts and for your insights today.
It was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you very much.